I knew something was wrong, the moment Lena Moreau walked past me without saying hello. In 11 years of working alongside Earth's senior ambassador to the Galactic Council, I had never once seen that woman pass a colleague without at least a nod. She smiled at janitors. She remembered birthdays. She once spent 40 minutes helping a Sonai intern fix his translation earpiece because nobody else bothered. That was the kind of person Lena Moreau was. And that was why, when she walked past me in the corridor outside the Grand Forum, with her eyes fixed straight ahead and her jaw set like stone, I felt a chill run through every nerve in my body. The session was supposed to be routine, a trade amendment, tariff adjustments on refined minerals from the outer belts. I had my notes prepared. 14 species had filed minor objections, and we expected 3 hours of polite disagreement before the vote. Standard council business. The kind of thing that put half the chamber to sleep. Moreau was not on the speaking schedule. When she stepped to the central podium, the chamber quieted the way it always did for human speakers. Not out of respect, I am ashamed to admit, but out of mild curiosity. Humans were still considered a novelty by most of the elder races, even after 214 years of membership. A young species, enthusiastic but inexperienced. That was the phrase I heard most often in the private dining halls where real council decisions were made. Enthusiastic but inexperienced. She placed a single sheet of paper on the lectern. Not a data tablet, not a holographic display. Paper. I remember thinking how strange that was. Then she spoke. "Esteemed members of the Galactic Council," she said, and her voice was steady in a way that made my stomach drop. "I stand before you today not to debate, not to negotiate, and not to ask for anything. I stand before you to inform you that the United Earth Coalition, by unanimous vote of its General Assembly, is formally invoking the dissolution of membership as outlined in the Founding Charter, Section 12, Subsection 4. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had experienced in 3 decades of diplomatic service. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a room full of powerful beings who had simply not processed what they just heard. Moreau continued. She read from the paper. A prepared statement, short and precise. Earth thanked the Council for 214 years of partnership. Earth acknowledged the contributions of all member species to its development. Earth wished a Council continued prosperity and stability. And Earth was leaving, effective immediately. She placed the founding seal, a small bronze disc that every member species kept as a symbol of their place in the galactic community, on the lectern beside the paper. Then she stepped down, walked up the center aisle, and exited through the main doors. The eruption that followed shook the walls. I did not stay for it. I ran after her. She was halfway to the shuttle bay when I caught up, my legs burning from the effort. Virel Sotan, senior diplomatic liaison, 63 years old, and not built for sprinting. She heard me coming, and slowed down. She even turned and gave me a small, sad smile, and that smile hurt worse than the announcement. "Lena," I said, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. "What is happening? What is this?" "It is exactly what it sounds like, Virel. You cannot be serious. The entire coalition? Unanimous?" Every nation, every territory, every voting district on Earth, the lunar colonies, the Mars settlements, and the belt stations, unanimous. It took 4 months of quiet deliberation, and the final vote was not even close. I grabbed her arm. She did not pull away, but she did not stop walking either. I let go. "Why?" I asked. "At least tell me why." She stopped then, turned to face me fully. Her eyes were calm, and there was something in them I had seen before but never understood, until that moment. It was exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but the deep, bone-level weariness of someone who had been carrying a weight for years, and had finally decided to set it down. "You know the reason, Virel," she said quietly. "You have always known. You just never thought we would act on it." She boarded her shuttle. The door sealed, the engines fired, and just like that, 2 centuries of humanity's presence in the galactic community ended with the quiet hiss of a closing airlock. I stood there for a long time. By the time I returned to the Grand Forum, the chaos had organized itself into something worse. Factions were forming. The Draelith delegation was already on their feet, pounding the speaking platform with their ceremonial staffs, demanding that the council declare Earth's withdrawal illegal. The Sonai sat in tight clusters, speaking in low voices, their skin flickering the pale blue that meant anxiety. Smaller delegations huddled near the exits, trying to figure out what this meant for their bilateral agreements with Earth. High Chancellor Dreth called for order 7 times before the room settled enough for him to speak. "Let us not overreact," he said, and his tone carried that particular brand of condescension that only someone who had held power for too long could produce. "The humans are a young species. They are prone to emotional decisions. This is a negotiation tactic, nothing more. They will make their demands, we will make modest concessions, and they will return. This is not the first time a member species has threatened withdrawal." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Heads nodded, tension eased. The narrative was already being written. The humans were throwing a tantrum. Give them a few weeks. They would come crawling back once they realized how much they depended on galactic trade. I requested the floor. "With respect, Chancellor," I said, "I spent 11 years stationed on Earth. I studied their culture, their history, their patterns of behavior. Humans do not bluff. When they make a decision of this magnitude, it is because they have already planned for every consequence and accepted every cost. This is not a negotiation, this is a departure." Dreth smiled at me, the way one might smile at a child who had said something accidentally amusing. "Virel, your affection for the humans is well documented and admirable, but you are letting sentiment cloud your judgment. No species walks away from the galactic community. The benefits are too great. The costs of isolation are too severe. They will return." I wanted to argue. I wanted to grab him by his ceremonial robes and shake him until his teeth rattled. But I had learned long ago that arguing with Chancellor Dreth was like arguing with weather. You could shout at it all you wanted, but it was going to do what it was going to do. I returned to my office instead. I pulled up Earth's formal withdrawal filing. It was a dense document, hundreds of pages of legal framework and procedural notices, and I began reading it line by line, because I knew that humans buried the important things in the details. I found it on page 47. Article 9. Full Severance Protocol. My hands went cold. Standard withdrawal from the Council meant a species left the political body but maintained existing technology sharing agreements, trade contracts, and infrastructure partnerships. It was a political exit, not a practical one. Most of the Council assumed that was what Earth had done. A dramatic gesture that would leave the actual machinery of cooperation untouched. Article 9 was different. Article 9 meant complete severance. Every human origin technology, every patent, every shared infrastructure system, every piece of software, hardware, or intellectual property that Earth had contributed to the galactic community was being recalled. Not metaphorically, literally. Earth was pulling the plug on everything. I read the clause 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. Then I read it a 4th time because I did not want to believe it. Every piece of human technology in the galaxy had just received a recall notice, and nobody in that chamber, not one of those confident, dismissive, self-assured council members, had any idea what that actually meant. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. In the distance, through the walls of the station, I could hear the faint rumble of shuttles launching, one after another, after another. I pulled up the docking logs and watched the entries scroll past. Human diplomatic staff departing Station 1. Human engineering teams recalling from Station 4. Human medical personnel withdrawing from Station 7. Human military advisors leaving Stations 9 through 12. Orderly, calm, efficient. No protests, no emotional scenes. Just quiet professionals packing their bags and going home, the way humans always did things when they had made up their minds. Within 6 hours, every human presence on every council station in the galaxy was gone. 214 years of partnership, erased in less time than it took to run a standard council budget meeting. And the worst part, the part that kept me awake that night and every night after, was that not one of them looked back. I will remember the emergency technical briefing for the rest of my life, not because of what was said, but because of the silence that followed. It was 48 hours after Earth's withdrawal. The Council had convened an emergency session, and for the first time in my career, every single seat was filled. No absences, no proxies. Even the Velhari, who had not attended a full session in 30 years, were present. The mood in the chamber had shifted from dismissal to something that was not quite fear, but was moving in that direction with uncomfortable speed. Chief Technical Director Salen Vor took the podium. Vor was a Meridian, one of the oldest species in the Council, and she had overseen galactic infrastructure coordination for the better part of a century. She was not someone who panicked easily, but when she activated the display behind her and the first set of data appeared, I saw her hands tremble. "What you are about to see," she said, "is a complete dependency audit of human origin systems across all Council infrastructure sectors. I ordered this audit 12 hours ago. The results are, to put it in terms this body will understand, catastrophic." She started with communications, the Galactic Comm Relay Network, the system that allowed instantaneous communication between any 2 points in Council space, ran on an encryption protocol that humans had designed 40 years ago. It was so efficient, so elegant, that the Council had adopted it universally and retired every previous system. No backup existed. No alternative had been maintained. When she asked her team how long it would take to build a replacement from scratch, the answer was 11 years, minimum. The room shifted uncomfortably. She moved to medical systems. 90% of Council member species used medical nanofabrication templates that were licensed from Earth, not purchased. Licensed. The license agreements were tied to Earth's Council membership, and with that membership dissolved, every single template was set to expire in 90 days. That meant hospitals on 400 worlds would lose the ability to fabricate emergency medical supplies, surgical tools, and pharmaceutical compounds in 3 months. Someone in the Draelith section stood up and demanded to know how this had happened. Vor looked at him with barely contained frustration and said, "It happened because the humans built something better than anything we had, offered it to us at a fraction of the cost, and we were happy to take it without ever asking what would happen if they left." She was not finished. The pathogen early warning grid, the system that monitored biological threats across all inhabited worlds and had prevented no fewer than 6 pandemic-level events in the last 50 years, was entirely human-built, designed, deployed, and maintained by Earth's Center for Galactic Disease Prevention. Every sensor node, every analysis algorithm, every alert protocol ran on human systems. Earth had already begun shutting it down. 312 worlds were now flying blind against biological threats that they had not needed to worry about in half a century. The FTL Beacon Calibration Network, which kept faster-than-light travel safe and reliable across Council space, used algorithms that a human mathematician named Grace Liu had developed 80 years ago. Nobody else understood them, not because they were secret, but because Liu's work operated on mathematical principles that human minds processed intuitively and alien minds could barely comprehend. Without those algorithms, FTL travel would become increasingly unreliable. Ships would start arriving off-target, by small margins at first, then larger ones. Within a year, long-range travel would become genuinely dangerous. Vor paused here. She took a breath, then she brought up the final item. The Universal Translation Matrix. Every species in the Council relied on it. Every diplomatic exchange, every trade negotiation, every legal proceeding, every emergency communication between species that did not share a language depended on a translation system that was so seamless, so invisible, that most people forgot it existed. It was the single most important piece of technology in the galactic community. It was a human, open-source project, created by a team at a university in a place called Edinburgh, maintained by a volunteer network of human linguists, programmers, and cultural specialists, and donated freely to the Council 70 years ago, with no restrictions, no fees, no conditions except one. The license required active Council membership. Earth had revoked access 6 hours ago. The backup systems were already failing. Minor translation errors were appearing in official documents. 2 trade agreements had been flagged for review because the translated terms no longer matched the originals. A medical emergency on Station 3 had been delayed by 9 minutes because the responding team could not understand the patient's species-specific symptoms through the degraded translation. The room was silent when Vor finished. I looked around the chamber at the faces of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and I saw something I had never seen before. Genuine, uncomplicated terror. Chancellor Dreth recovered first. He always did. "These dependencies can be addressed," he said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried 2 days earlier. "We have the finest engineers and scientists in the galaxy. We will rebuild what needs rebuilding, and develop alternatives where necessary." Vor did not even look at him. "Chancellor, I have spent the last 20 hours reviewing every system the humans touched. I need this body to understand something fundamental. The humans did not simply contribute technology to the galactic community. They became the galactic community. Every critical system either runs on human technology, was designed by human engineers, or depends on human maintenance. We did not notice because they never demanded credit. They never held it over us. They just quietly solved every problem we could not solve ourselves, and we let them because it was convenient, and because it made us feel generous to accept help from the young species." The political fracture that followed was immediate and vicious. The Draelith delegation blamed the Sonai for allowing Earth too much access to critical systems. The Sonai turned it back on the Draelith, reminding everyone that it was the Draelith who had blocked human military parity for a century, who had insisted on keeping humans classified as a developmental species, who had voted down every human proposal for equal standing. The smaller delegations started picking sides. Within an hour, the Grand Forum had devolved into something that looked less like a governing body and more like a collapsing building. I sat through all of it. I did not speak. I was thinking about something Lena Moreau had said to me once, years ago, during one of our evening conversations at the embassy. She had been telling me about a concept in human culture called the load-bearing wall. It was a construction term. In human buildings, certain walls carried the weight of the entire structure. They looked like any other wall. You could not tell them apart just by looking. But if you removed one, the building fell down. She had smiled when she told me this, and I had thought she was just making conversation. Now, sitting in a chamber full of panicking galactic leaders, I understood that she had been trying to warn me. The first real consequence hit 3 days later. 3 frontier stations lost access to their medical fabrication systems simultaneously. It was not dramatic. There was no explosion, no alarm, no visible failure. The machines simply stopped recognizing the operational templates and locked themselves. 3 stations, serving a combined population of 4 million beings, suddenly could not produce basic medical supplies. 2 days after that, an atmosphere processor on a colony world called Vareth Prime flagged a license expiration notice. The processor, which maintained breathable air for 900,000 colonists, had been engineered by a human firm and installed under a maintenance contract tied to Earth's Council membership. The system displayed a polite, professionally worded message informing the colonial administration that service would terminate in 30 days and recommending they contact the manufacturer for renewal options. The manufacturer, of course, was on Earth, and Earth was not taking calls. Panic did not arrive all at once. It crept in from the edges, from the frontier worlds and the outer stations, where human technology was most deeply embedded and alternatives were most scarce. Each day brought a new failure, a new dependency discovered too late, a new system that everyone had taken for granted, suddenly revealing itself as human-made and human-dependent. I received a message from Moreau that evening. It arrived through a private channel that should not have existed anymore, since Earth had shut down all official communication lines. But Lena had always been resourceful. It was one line. "We did not leave because we were angry, Virel. We left because we finally did the math on what we give versus what we get." The numbers were not close. I read it 7 times. Then I closed the message and sat alone in my office, listening to the station hum around me, and wondering how many of the systems keeping me alive at that moment had been built by the people who just walked out the door. They gave me a title, Head of the Human Transition Task Force. It sounded important, official. It came with a corner office on Station 1 and a staff of 40 specialists from 12 different species. What it actually meant was that I was the person everyone screamed at when something else broke. 2 weeks after Earth's departure, my morning briefings had become an exercise in cataloging disasters. The galactic shipping lane network was degrading, not all at once, but steadily, in the way that a machine without maintenance slowly grinds itself apart. The navigation buoys that guided commercial and military vessels through safe FTL corridors were human-designed, and they required periodic calibration updates from a central hub that no longer responded to queries. Each day, a few more buoys went dark. Each day, the safe corridors narrowed slightly. Shipping companies began rerouting around dead zones, adding days to transit times that had been optimized over decades. Supply chains that had functioned like clockwork started stumbling. On the 9th day, a Kalori freighter carrying medical supplies to a plague-affected colony missed its exit point by 6,000 kilometers because the local navigation buoy had gone offline 12 hours earlier than predicted. The ship dropped out of FTL in an uncharted debris field. It survived, barely, but the medical supplies were destroyed, and the colony went another week without treatment. On the 11th day, something worse happened. A border dispute between the Torreni Federation and the Meikai Compact, two minor powers who had been snarling at each other for decades over a contested mining region, escalated from diplomatic complaints to live weapons fire. Under normal circumstances, the early warning satellite network would have detected both fleets mobilizing and alerted the Council mediators before a single shot was fired. The system had prevented exactly this kind of incident dozens of times, but the satellites were human technology, and they were offline. By the time the Council learned about the engagement, 14 ships had been destroyed, and 300 beings were dead. A conflict that should have been a strongly worded letter became a funeral. I delivered the report to the Council personally. I stood at the same podium where Moreau had announced Earth's withdrawal and told that chamber full of leaders that people had died because of a gap in coverage that would not have existed if they had treated humanity as an equal partner instead of a convenient servant. Chancellor Dreth told me I was being dramatic. The famine alert from the Kalori cluster arrived 2 days later. 47 agricultural worlds, the breadbasket of an entire quadrant, reported simultaneous crop yield failures. Not disease, not weather, software. Their agricultural optimization systems, the programs that coordinated planting schedules, soil treatment, water distribution, and harvest timing, across billions of acres of farmland, ran on human-designed platforms that connected to Earth-based servers for seasonal updates. The servers had gone dark. The software was still running, but it was using last season's data to make this season's decisions, and the results were already showing. Yields were down 18% and falling. 18% does not sound like much until you understand that those 47 worlds fed 200 billion beings across the quadrant. An 18% reduction meant rationing. A sustained reduction meant famine. I assembled a team of the best agricultural scientists from 6 species and asked them to build a replacement system. They studied the human software for 3 days and came back to me with expressions I had come to recognize. That particular mix of humiliation and awe that every technical team displayed after trying to understand human engineering. The code is clean, my lead analyst, a Meridian named Torvis, told me. It follows every standard, every protocol. The documentation is thorough, but the logic itself operates in patterns that our minds simply cannot replicate. It is as if the humans think in a different dimension of problem solving. We can read every line and still not understand how it works as a whole. I heard the same report from every engineering team I sent to tackle human systems. The code was not encrypted, it was not hidden, it was not sabotaged. It was simply brilliant in a way that no other species could reproduce. Human engineers thought differently. They saw connections that others missed, built solutions that were simultaneously simple and profound, and documented everything with cheerful clarity that somehow made the underlying genius even more impenetrable. One of my programmers described it as trying to reverse engineer a sunset. You could measure the wavelengths, catalog the colors, map the atmospheric conditions, and still have no idea how to make one. The Council sent delegations to Earth, 3 of them, in rapid succession, each one carrying more concessions than the last. The first delegation, led by a senior Drelith diplomat, arrived on Earth and was received with impeccable courtesy. They were met at the landing pad, escorted to comfortable quarters, given a tour of Geneva, offered meals prepared to their specific dietary requirements, and treated with the kind of warm, patient hospitality that humans were famous for. They presented their proposal, a modest package of reforms and increased representation in exchange for Earth's return. The human negotiating team listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and then politely declined. No counteroffer, no conditions, just a friendly, firm no. The second delegation carried real concessions: full voting rights in the Security Directorate, a seat on the Technology Oversight Board, removal of the developmental species classification that had kept humans in a subordinate position for 2 centuries. It was more than any species had ever been offered in Council history. The human response was identical: tea, courtesy, a tour of the botanical gardens, and a gentle refusal. The third delegation was led by Chancellor Dreth himself. He brought the kind of offer that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. Complete restructuring of the Council hierarchy, a permanent human seat on the Chancellor's advisory circle, full retroactive credit for every human contribution to galactic infrastructure, public acknowledgement of Earth's role in every major achievement of the last 2 centuries. The humans thanked him for coming. They showed him a museum. They let him try something called chocolate cake, and they said no. I watched the recordings of each delegation. I studied the human faces, their body language, their tone of voice. I was looking for leverage, some sign of hesitation, some crack in their resolve that could be exploited. What I found instead was something that chilled me far more than anger or resentment ever could. They were happy. Earth was thriving. Their cities were clean and vibrant. Their people moved through the streets with an energy I had not seen during my years stationed there, as though a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Research institutions were publishing at record rates. Artists were producing work of stunning creativity. Children were laughing in parks. Old people were sitting in cafes, arguing about philosophy and feeding birds. They did not look like a species in crisis. They looked like a species that had been freed. That was the moment I understood, truly understood, what had happened. We had been operating under the assumption that Earth needed the galactic community, that without access to interstellar trade, alien technology, and the political framework of the Council, humanity would wither. That assumption was the foundation of every strategy, every delegation, every concession. And it was completely, devastatingly wrong. Humans had been giving far more than they received. The trade relationships that we thought sustained them were, from their perspective, charitable donations. The technology sharing that we believed elevated them was, in reality, a one-way flow of innovation from Earth outward. The political framework that we assumed protected them was, in their calculation, a cage that cost them more in compromises than it provided in benefits. They had done the math, and then they had left. I dug into the historical archives after that. I spent 4 days without sleep, pulling every record I could find of human involvement in galactic affairs over the past 2 centuries. What I uncovered was not a story of a young species learning from its elders. It was a story of a gifted species being exploited by those who should have been its partners. 60 years ago, a solar plague had threatened to sterilize 11 inhabited worlds in the outer reach. Council response teams had been unable to contain it. Their models were wrong, their countermeasures ineffective. A human epidemiological team, working without official authorization, had developed a solar radiation filter that neutralized the plague in 72 hours. The Council report credited a joint multi-species task force. The human team was mentioned in a footnote. 40 years ago, 3 simultaneous territorial wars had threatened to collapse the Council's eastern frontier. Every mediation attempt had failed. A human diplomat named Elise Hartwell had spent 2 years shuttling between the warring factions, learning their languages, understanding their grievances, and building trust through sheer persistence and empathy. She brokered all 3 ceasefires personally. The peace accords bore the Council's seal. Hartwell's name appeared nowhere in the official record. 20 years ago, a refugee crisis involving 200 million displaced beings from a collapsed star system had overwhelmed every existing resettlement framework. Humans designed a new one from scratch in 6 weeks. It was adopted across 60 worlds and became the standard model for refugee management. The Council adopted it under the name Galactic Resettlement Protocol. No mention of its human origin survived the committee review process. Every crisis, every breakthrough, every quiet, thankless act of brilliance that had kept the galactic community from tearing itself apart. Humans, every single time. And every single time, the Council had taken the credit, filed the contribution under joint effort, and continued treating humanity as the eager young newcomer who should be grateful for the privilege of sitting at the adults' table. I closed the archives and sat in the dark for a long time. Then, the Draelith Empire made the worst decision in galactic history. The announcement came through official military channels, broadcast on all frequencies, in all languages, with the kind of theatrical gravity that the Draelith loved. The Second Fleet, 400 warships strong, the most powerful conventional military force in the galaxy, was being deployed to the Sol system. Earth had 72 hours to reinstate all technology agreements, return to the Council, and submit to a formal review of its obligations. Failure to comply would be met with corrective measures. The word they used was corrective, as if humanity were a misbehaving child who needed discipline. Half the council chamber erupted in quiet applause. The Draelith had always been the hammer, the enforcement arm that kept smaller species in line. This was what they did. They showed up with overwhelming force, made their demands, and got what they wanted, because nobody could stand against them. I looked at the other half of the chamber. The Sonai delegation had gone pale, their skin the deep indigo of absolute dread. The Meridians were motionless, which was their version of the same emotion. A few of the smaller delegations were already gathering their things, as if preparing to leave the room before something terrible happened. These were the ones who had studied humans. These were the ones who understood. I tried one last time to stop it. I demanded the floor, bypassed the speaking queue, and stood at the podium with my heart hammering against my ribs. "You do not understand what you are doing," I said. "You are threatening a species that has never lost a war. Not once, in their entire history. They fight among themselves constantly. They have spent millennia perfecting the art of conflict, and they have survived every catastrophe their world has thrown at them. And those are just the wars they fought with primitive weapons on a single planet. You have no idea what they are capable of now." Chancellor Dreth cut me off. "The Draelith Second Fleet has never been defeated either, Ambassador Sotan. This is not a debate. This is a restoration of order." I left the chamber. 6 hours after the Draelith fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system, Earth responded. Not with a fleet, not with a weapon, not with a speech or a counter-threat or a display of military power. With a man named Harlan Cole. Cole was, according to the transmission header, a civil engineer from a city called Portland. He was Earth's designated communications officer for, and I am quoting the official title exactly, unwanted visitors. His transmission was audio only. His voice was flat, bored, and carried the tone of someone who had been pulled away from something more interesting to deal with a minor inconvenience. He read a prepared statement. Earth acknowledged the presence of the Draelith Second Fleet at the boundary of the Sol system. Earth considered this presence a navigational hazard and a violation of sovereign space. Earth requested that the fleet vacate the area within 4 hours. No threats were made. No consequences were outlined. It was phrased exactly like a municipal notice, the kind of thing a city government might post on a lamppost about overnight parking restrictions. The Draelith fleet commander, a decorated veteran named Toral, responded with what I can only describe as incredulous fury. He broadcast his reply on all channels, clearly intending it as a public humiliation. He called Cole's statement an insult to the greatest military power in the galaxy. He said Earth had 4 hours to reconsider before the fleet advanced. He said the age of human arrogance was over. Cole's response was a single sentence. Acknowledged. Timer starts now. The fleet advanced. I was watching from Station 1's observation center, along with 200 other diplomats and officials who had gathered to witness what they expected would be a swift and decisive demonstration of Draelith military superiority. The Draelith ships crossed the Sol system boundary at battle speed, shields raised, weapons charged, Formation perfect. 400 warships arranged in the classic Draelith assault pattern that had conquered 60 worlds over the last millennium. It was an impressive sight, I will not deny that. The kind of military display that made you understand, on a visceral level, why the Draelith had dominated galactic politics for so long. Then every single ship went dark. Simultaneously, completely. Every light, every engine, every weapons system, every shield generator, every life support indicator on our monitoring screens flatlined at the exact same instant. 400 warships, the pride of the Draelith Empire, turned into 400 pieces of drifting metal in the space between heartbeats. The observation center went silent. 30 seconds later, everything came back on. Engines, weapons, shields, communications, life support, all of it, restored as quickly as it had been taken. The Draelith ships stumbled back into formation, like drunkards trying to find their footing. Then a second transmission from Earth. Not Cole this time, an automated message, calm and clinical, playing on repeat. This was a demonstration of capability, applied to 14 human-patented subsystems, currently integrated into Draelith military technology. Full system shutdown was maintained for 30 seconds. Duration and scope can be adjusted. This is the only demonstration that will be provided. Earth respectfully requests compliance with the previously stated 4-hour departure window. 2 hours and 12 minutes remain. I watched the Draelith fleet retreat. Not withdraw, not reposition. Retreat. Full speed, every ship for itself. Formation abandoned, dignity forgotten. 400 warships running from a single planet that had not fired a single shot. The observation center remained silent for a long time after that. What followed was not a political earthquake, it was a political extinction event. Within 24 hours, 3 council member species filed formal requests for independent bilateral treaties with Earth, openly breaking council unity for the first time since the institution's founding. 2 more species began evacuating their populations from council stations, reasoning that if Earth could shut down the Draelith fleet remotely, they could shut down anything, and nobody wanted to be on a station when the power went out. The Draelith delegation withdrew from the council chamber entirely, refusing to participate in any further proceedings. Their ambassador released a statement calling the incident an act of war. Nobody took it seriously. You do not call something an act of war when the other side just proved they could end you without breaking a sweat. Chancellor Dreth called an emergency session and pleaded for unity. For the first time in council history, he was openly ignored. Species that had followed his lead for decades now sat in their seats, with their arms crossed and their eyes on the exit. The chamber that had governed the galaxy for over 1,000 years suddenly felt like what it was, a room full of frightened people who had just realized that the foundation they had built their power on belonged to someone else. I sat through the session without speaking. There was nothing left to say. Every warning I had given had been proven right, and being right felt nothing like I had imagined it would. It felt hollow and tired and sad. After the session, I returned to my office and found a message waiting. Moreau again. This time, it was not a single line. It was a formal invitation, written on council standard diplomatic stationery, but bearing Earth's new independent seal. It was addressed to me personally, not to my office, not to my position, not to the council, to Vur Sultan. Earth wanted to talk, but only to me, not as a representative of the Galactic Council, not as the head of the Human Transition Task Force. As a friend, I read the invitation twice. Then I booked passage to Earth on the next available transport, ignoring the council directive that prohibited unauthorized contact with human officials. Some things are more important than directives. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday afternoon, and the first thing I noticed was the clouds. I had forgotten how beautiful Earth's clouds were, thick, white, sculpted by winds that had been shaping them since long before any species in the galaxy had learned to look up. I pressed my face against the viewport like a child and watched them drift past. And for a moment, I forgot about the council, the crisis, the 14 human-patented subsystems that could apparently shut down the most powerful military fleet in the galaxy. I just watched the clouds. Geneva looked exactly as I remembered it. The lake shimmered under afternoon sun. The old buildings stood shoulder to shoulder with newer ones, in that way humans had, never tearing down the past, just building the future beside it. The mountains in the distance wore caps of snow that caught the light and threw it back in colors I had no name for in my own language. Moreau met me at a cafe 3 blocks from the old embassy building. I had spent many evenings there during my posting, drinking tea with human colleagues, arguing about philosophy, trying to understand a species that could simultaneously produce breathtaking art and terrible puns. The owner, a small man named Georges, recognized me and brought my usual order without being asked. Valerian root tea with honey, he remembered after 11 years. That small act of kindness nearly undid me. Moreau looked good, rested. The exhaustion I had seen in her eyes the day she walked out of the Grand Forum was gone, replaced by something quieter and steadier. She wore civilian clothes. No diplomatic insignia, no formal identification, nothing to mark her as a representative of anything larger than herself. She sat across from me and stirred her coffee and waited for me to speak first. "You could have warned me," I said. "Would it have changed anything? I could have prepared. I could have tried to broker a better outcome before things went this far." She shook her head gently. "Virel, we spent 50 years trying to broker a better outcome from inside the system. Every proposal was buried. Every reform was blocked. Every contribution was absorbed without credit. We were not partners. We were staff. And at a certain point, the only honest thing to do was acknowledge that and act accordingly. The Dralith fleet," I said. "The kill switches in your technology. You planned that. We did not plan the Dralith sending a fleet. We prepared for the possibility that someone might. There is a difference. You built weapons into your own technology. Technology you shared freely with the entire galaxy. You put hidden controls into systems that billions of beings depend on." She set down her coffee and looked at me directly. "Virel, every piece of technology has an off switch. Every system has a maintenance protocol that can shut it down for service. We did not build weapons. We built normal, responsible safeguards that any competent engineer would include in critical infrastructure. The fact that the Council never inspected what they were installing, never verified what they were depending on, never once asked how it worked or what would happen if it stopped, that is not our failing. That is theirs." I sat with that for a moment. She was right, and I hated that she was right. "Why did you ask me here?" I said. "Specifically me, not a delegation, not a negotiating team. Me." Moreau smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I had seen from her since the day she walked out of the Grand Forum. "Because you are the only council member who ever argued for us, not because it was strategically advantageous, but because it was the right thing to do. You fought for human rights when it cost you politically. You defended our contributions when everyone else was happy to take credit. You came to Earth, learned our customs, drank our tea, listened to our music, and tried to understand us as people, not as assets or liabilities. I failed," I said. "Nothing I did changed anything. You did not fail, Virel. The system failed. There is a profound difference, and I need you to understand it, because what I am about to propose depends on you believing it." She reached into her bag and produced a thin folder. Inside was a document, printed on paper because humans still loved their paper, outlining a framework that I recognized immediately as the most elegant piece of diplomatic architecture I had ever seen. Earth was not retreating from the galaxy. Earth was rebuilding its relationship with the galaxy on completely new terms. The framework proposed direct bilateral partnerships between Earth and any species that wanted one. No hierarchy, no senior and junior classifications, no developmental species restrictions, no intermediary body deciding who was worthy of what level of access. Simple, transparent, mutual agreements between equals. Each partnership would be customized. Species that had treated humans fairly during their time in the Council would find Earth a generous and enthusiastic ally, eager to share technology, collaborate on research, and build something better than what the Council had offered. Species that had exploited or mistreated humans would find Earth perfectly polite, perfectly civil, and completely uninterested in doing business. "This is not revenge," Moreau said, reading my expression. "We are not punishing anyone. We are simply choosing to invest our energy where it is valued and reciprocated." That is not an act of hostility. It is an act of self-respect. The Council will see it as an act of war, I said. The Council is welcome to see it however they wish. We are no longer members, so their interpretation is no longer our concern. I read through the framework twice. It was thorough, practical, and fair. It anticipated objections, addressed security concerns, and included provisions for gradual integration that would give partner species time to adapt. It was, I realized, the proposal that humans had been trying to make through Council channels for decades, stripped of all the compromises and concessions that the Council process had demanded, and presented in its pure, original form. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to be the bridge," she said. "Not a spy, not a double agent, not a Council representative pretending to be neutral. An honest broker who understands both sides and can help willing species navigate this transition. You know us, Virel. You know what we value and how we think. And you know the Council, its strengths and its limitations. There is no one better positioned to help both sides find a way forward. The Council will call me a traitor. Probably. Does that matter to you more than doing the right thing?" I looked at her for a long time. Outside the cafe window, a human child was chasing pigeons across the plaza, laughing with the kind of unself-conscious joy that I had always found both baffling and deeply moving about this species. A couple walked past holding hands. An old man sat on a bench reading a book, his face soft with concentration. This was what the galaxy had dismissed, not a primitive species, not an emotional, underdeveloped race that needed guidance and patience, a civilization of staggering depth and resilience, capable of building systems that held the galaxy together and walking away from them when the arrangement was no longer fair. A people who could bring a 400-ship fleet to its knees without firing a shot and then invite you to coffee to talk about the future. "I will do it," I said. I returned to the Council 4 days later. The chamber I came back to was not the one I had left. 7 species had already signed bilateral agreements with Earth: the Sonai, the Velhari, the Kelori, and 4 smaller delegations who had been quiet members for centuries had all bypassed the Council entirely and gone directly to Earth. Each had received a customized partnership framework, tailored to their specific needs and capabilities, and each had reported that negotiations with humans were unlike anything they had experienced in Council diplomacy. No power games, no hidden agendas, no leverage tactics, just honest conversation between equals about what each side needed and what each side could offer. The Meridians were in advanced talks. 2 more species were in preliminary discussions. The galactic order that had held for 1,000 years was not collapsing through conflict. It was evaporating through choice. Chancellor Dreth summoned me to his private chambers the moment I returned. He looked older than I had ever seen him. The polished confidence that had carried him through decades of leadership was cracked, and through the cracks, I could see something I had never expected to see in the High Chancellor. Fear. "What are their demands?" he asked. No preamble, no diplomatic niceties, just the desperate question of a man watching his world crumble. "They have no demands," I said. "Everyone has demands, Virel. What do they want?" "They want to be treated as equals. They always wanted that. We refused, and now they have found another way to get it. That is the entirety of the situation." He stared at me. "That cannot be all." "It is." "Then what are we supposed to do?" I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered every vote he had blocked, every human proposal he had buried, every time he had smiled his condescending smile and called them enthusiastic but inexperienced, and the sympathy faded. "You can adapt," I said. "You can accept that the Council as it existed was not sustainable, that it was built on the labor and innovation of a species you treated as subordinate, and that without them, it cannot function. You can reform, genuinely reform, not the performative gestures you offered before, but real structural change. And you can approach Earth not as a former member who needs to be brought back into line, but as a sovereign equal who has something you desperately need. Or," he said, "or you can do nothing and watch the rest of the Council leave, one species at a time, until there is no Council left. Earth has not destroyed this institution, Chancellor. Earth has simply offered an alternative, and the alternative is better. That is not aggression. That is competition, and you are losing. I left his chambers and returned to my office. Through the window, I could see the Grand Forum across the plaza, its spires reaching toward the stars, its halls still lit, its corridors still busy with diplomats and officials going through the motions of governance. But the energy was different. The purpose that had once filled that building like oxygen had leaked away, replaced by the frantic activity of people trying to keep something alive that was already dying. I sat down at my desk and began drafting the first communications between Earth and the species that wanted to talk. It was painstaking work, delicate and detailed, requiring me to translate not just languages, but entire philosophies of governance and cooperation. But for the first time in years, the work felt meaningful, not because it served the Council, or advanced my career, or maintained a system I had spent my life propping up, because it was right. Humans have a saying. They have many sayings, more than any species I have ever encountered. But this one has stayed with me since the first time I heard it. Sitting in a bar in Geneva with Lena Moreau, while rain streaked the windows, and jazz played softly from somewhere in the back. Do not mistake kindness for weakness. I had heard it, and filed it away as one of those charming human aphorisms, the kind of folksy wisdom that every culture produces, and few actually live by. I did not understand until much later that it was not wisdom at all. It was a warning. A clear, direct, unmistakable warning that humanity had been broadcasting to the galaxy for 200 years, in every interaction, every act of generosity, every unrewarded contribution, every patient smile in the face of condescension. The galaxy just never listened. We took their kindness and called it naivety. We took their patience and called it submission. We took their brilliance and called it enthusiasm. And when they finally stopped giving and simply walked away, we had the nerve to act surprised. They did not burn the bridge. They did not threaten to burn it. They did not even mention fire. They simply stopped carrying us across it. And that was when we realized, every single one of us, from the mightiest chancellor to the lowliest clerk, that we had never learned to walk. I do not know what the galaxy will look like in 10 years. The Council may survive in some reduced form, or it may dissolve entirely. New alliances are forming daily, new partnerships taking shape, new frameworks emerging from the creative chaos that humanity's departure unleashed. The universe is in motion in a way it has not been for centuries, and for the first time, the motion is not being controlled by a single institution. It is organic, messy, uncertain, human. And perhaps, I think, as I seal my latest report and watch the lights of the station reflect off the viewport, perhaps that is not something to fear. Perhaps the galaxy does not need a single council telling every species how to relate to every other. Perhaps what it needs is what humanity offered all along: partnership. Genuine, voluntary, mutual partnership between equals who choose to work together because they want to, not because a charter compels them. The humans will be fine. They were always going to be fine. They were fine before they joined the council. They were fine while they carried it. And they are fine now that they have set it down. The question that keeps me awake at night, the one I still cannot answer, is whether the rest of us will learn to be fine without them. I hope we will. I have to hope, because the alternative is too bleak to consider. But I will tell you this much. If we do learn, if we do grow, if we do finally become the galaxy we always claimed to be, it will be because a small, stubborn, brilliant species, from a tiny blue world, on the edge of an unremarkable spiral arm, showed us what we were missing. Not with weapons, not with threats, not with force, with kindness, with patience, with work. And then, when we refuse to see it, with absence. That, I think, is the most human lesson of all. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply leave the room and let the silence speak for itself. The silence is deafening now. And finally, at long last, we are listening.